Good morning, Katarzyna. And this is, I don't know, it might be the final installment. I've lost count. Anyway, it's something different, and it's something a little bit, well, special to me. I hope it is special to you. I'm sure your children are able to understand this, and I am sure that they will, in time, grow to love this book. But I don't know if it's really for them either, to be honest. Right. I've just woken up. It's 20 minutes to 5 here. I think my voice is okay. My eyesight is terrible, and this book has got very, very small print. But I'll try. Anyway. Yes, here we are. Excuse me, I'm going to move chair because I need to sit right under the light. Otherwise I can't see properly. Oh, gosh, bloody cables everywhere. Oh, this is turning into a shit, falling over chairs. That's it, that's the light. And this is a chair. Okay. And this is a book. So I have the 3 things that I need. Oh, and I have coffee as well. 4 things that I need. See, sound effects. I was going to read the introduction, because that's really very interesting historically. But I think the actual book itself is rather better, and it might make you laugh. It certainly makes me laugh a lot. I won't insult you by telling you what it is. Chapter 1. The good soldier Schweik intervenes in the Great War. "And so they've killed our Ferdinand," said the charwoman to Mr. Schweik, who had left military service years before, after having been finally certified by an army medical board as an imbecile, and now lived by selling dogs, ugly, mongrel monstrosities, whose pedigrees he forged. Apart from this occupation, he suffered from rheumatism, and was at this very moment rubbing his knees with Ellmann's embrocation. "Which Ferdinand, Mrs. Müller?" he asked, going on with the massaging. "I know 2 Ferdinands. One is a messenger at Prussia's the chemist's, and once by mistake drank a bottle of hair oil. And the other is Ferdinand Koloschka, who collects dog manure. Neither of them is any loss." "Oh no, sir. It's His Imperial Highness, the Archduke Ferdinand from Konopishte, the fat, churchy one." "Jesus Maria!" exclaimed Schweik. "What a grand job! And where did this happen to His Imperial Highness?" "They bumped him off in Sarajevo, sir, with a revolver, you know. He drove there in a car with his Archduchess." "Well, there you have it, Mrs. Müller. In a car. Yes, of course, a gentleman like him can afford it, but he never imagines that a drive like that might finish up badly. And at Sarajevo into the bargain. That's in Bosnia, Mrs. Müller. I expect the Turks did it. You know, we ought never to have taken Bosnia and Herzegovina from them. And do you see, Mrs. Müller, His Imperial Highness now rests with the angels. Did he suffer long?" "No, His Imperial Highness was done for at once, sir. You know, a revolver isn't just a toy. Not long ago there was a gentleman in Neuschle, where I come from, who fooled about with a revolver too. And what happened?
He shot his whole family, and the porter, too, who came up to see what the shooting was all about on the 3rd floor.
There are some revolvers, Mrs. Müller, that won't go off even if you bust yourself. There are lots of that type. But for His Imperial Highness, I am sure they must have bought something better. And I wouldn't mind betting, Mrs. Müller, that the chap who did it put on smart togs for the occasions. Potting at an Imperial Highness is no easy job, you know. It's not like a poacher potting at a gamekeeper. The question is, how do you get at him? You can't come near a fine gentleman like that if you're dressed in rags. You've got to wear a topper, so that the cops don't nab you beforehand.
There were a lot of them, sir.
Well, of course, Mrs. Müller, said Schweik, finishing massaging his knees. If you wanted to kill His Imperial Highness, or for that matter, even His Imperial Majesty the Emperor, you'd certainly need advice. Several heads are wiser than one. One chap advises you this, another that, and then the deed is crowned with success, as our national anthem says. The main thing is to watch out for the moment when a gentleman like that rides past. Just like old Lucchini, if you remember, who stabbed our late lamented Elizabeth with a file. He just went for a stroll with her. Who's going to trust anybody now? After that, there'll be no more strolls for empresses. And a lot of other persons will have it coming to them too, you know. You mark my words, Mrs. Müller. It'll be the turn of the Tsar and Tsarina next. And maybe, even though God forbid, the turn of His Imperial Majesty the Emperor. Now that they've got his uncle. He's got a lot of enemies, the old gentleman has. Even more than Ferdinand. Not long ago, a gentleman was telling us in the pub that a time would come when all these emperors would get done in, one after the other, and all the king's horses and all the king's men wouldn't save them. After that, he hadn't any money to pay his bill, and the landlord had to have him arrested. He hit the landlord across the jaw, and the policeman as well. So after that they took him away in a drunk's cart to sober him up again. Well, Mrs. Müller, what a world we live in, to be sure. What a loss for Austria again. When I was in the army, an infantryman once shot a captain. He loaded his rifle and went into his office. They told him he had no business there, but he went on insisting that he must speak to the captain. The captain looked up at once and confined him to barracks. So he took up his rifle, and bang it went, plumb through the captain's heart. The bullet flew out of his back and damaged the office as well. It smashed a bottle of ink, which messed up all the official documents.
My goodness, what happened to that soldier? Asked Mrs. Müller, while Schweik was dressing.
He hanged himself with his braces, said Schweik, cleaning his bowler hat. And what's more, they weren't even his braces. He'd borrowed them from a warder on the excuse that his trousers were always falling down. Do you think he should have waited until they shot him? You know, Mrs. Müller, in a situation like that, anyone would be in a flap. They reduced the order to the ranks because of it, and gave him 6 months. But he didn't sit them out. He ran away to Switzerland, and today he's a preacher of some church or another. Today, there are very few honest people about. I can imagine His Imperial Highness, the Archduke Ferdinand, made a mistake in Sarajevo about that chap who shot him. He saw a gentleman and thought, he must be a decent fellow who's giving me a cheer. And instead of a cheer, he gave him bang, bang. Did he have one bang or several, Mrs. Müller?
The newspaper says, sir, that His Imperial Highness was riddled like a sieve. He emptied all his cartridges into him.
Well, it goes jolly quickly, Mrs. Muller. Terribly quickly. I'd buy a Browning for a job like that. It looks like a toy, but in a couple of minutes you can shoot 20 archdukes with it. Never mind whether they're thin or fat. Although between you and me, Mrs. Muller, a fat archduke is a better mark than a thin one. You may remember the time they shot that king of theirs in Portugal. He was a fat chap too. After all, you wouldn't expect a king to be thin, would you? Well, now I'm going to the pub, the Chalice, and if anyone comes here for that miniature pincher which I took an advance on, please tell them I've got him in my kennels in the country, and that I've only just cropped his ears. He mustn't be moved until they heal up. Otherwise, they'll catch cold. Would you please give the key to the house porter?
And that is only the first 4 pages. There's a lot to read there, sorry, and there's a lot of rather advanced English. I mean, I'm sure you will understand it when you read it in the original language, but I did want to sort of stop a couple of times and explain things, but I didn't want to interrupt the reading. If there's anything problematic, I might try and write it down and send you a file or something. I probably won't, because I always promise things and never do them. I think you are learning that by now. Right, have a really lovely, lovely day, and yeah, I think it's going to be a good one. Bye-bye.